Hi, folks, and welcome to another Saturday morning Samoflange. I'm Matt.
Come! Have you ever wanted to... somebody knocks on your door and you just want to say, come! Like, how authoritative and amazing is that?
Nah, I thought for a minute you were going to say, con! But that's the wrong captain. So anyway,
yes, wrong captain. Yes, just that's one of my favorite parts of The Next Generation is how Patrick Stewart answers the door. Come! And it's terrific. So, part 2.
I should have had some Earl Grey, but go ahead.
Oh, man.
I don't have any Earl Grey right now.
We don't have any Earl Grey.
I should have actually Earl Grey for us. But anyway, so part 2 of Patrick Stewart's...
pretend like we're sipping on some Earl Grey.
I want to pretend it. So part 2 of Patrick Stewart's biography. We want to go into this because there's some good parts I want to talk about.
Yes, his memoir.
Memoir, so to speak, yeah.
So... Yes, last week you so rudely cut me off in the middle of my topic, but that's quite all right because we get to expound a little bit more on one of our favorite characters and people.
And there's good stuff yet to come, you said.
Good stuff yet to come. Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to be rambling on. I hope
no, it's been
about
great
nothing.
So far.
Okay, good. So I talked a lot about his youth, his theater upbringing, and childhood, and how he got to TNG, and. It's great because a third of the book probably is the part that we know, and 2/3 is the part that we don't know. And I think for me personally, as an actor and also as someone who's interested in that kind of thing, and if anybody has any interest in the theater, like the first 2/3 of the book, I was both shocked and so pleasantly surprised at how much of it was not about Star Trek. And how much of the book was not at all about X-Men or anything else. And
that's good in a way because you get to know more than what he is or who he is.
Precisely.
But at the same time, it may have disappointed some fans because I'll be honest, when I read Warwick Davis's autobiography, he spoke a lot about Leprechaun because that's what he's done. Leprechaun.
Interesting.
But he skimmed over the Ewok movies, which I guess they were just... but no one really knows. But that Star Wars... He talked about a lot about Return of the Jedi. Said, I made 2 TV movies, too, that were fun. And then I was like, whoa,
that's it.
So really just skipped over them. I said, well, I want to hear about the TV movies.
Interesting.
But, it's kind of weird because some things he just didn't think were as important to me. But that is interesting that he showed you there was more to him
than
true. Just what you
and
know
I wonder
him
with
for.
Warwick Davis, like how much of that is your editor cutting you that out? How much of it is they think they need to sell books?
Possibly. But his editor should have said, hey, you don't sound humble at all. And he's very proud of himself.
Cool.
So, anyway.
I mean, that's great. You never get that vibe, that kind of vibe from this. At least I didn't. Like the moments that he does brag, he like sets you up. He's like, listen, I'm going to brag for just a second, but because let me tell you how cool this moment was. He sets it up appropriately when he does brag so that you kind of feel like, okay, that's actually really cool.
I'm a brag.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you bragging about that. Like, that was good. Dude.
I'm not saying you can't brag what you do.
No. But that's the joy of it is that he is very humble and, he grew up in that and that's a joke that he talks about with, I think Frakes or Michael Dorn says that to him all the time. Ever since they just started doing Star Trek, he says, okay, but you do your poor man mentality or your poor mentality or something, because Patrick Stewart never does, he folds his own laundry every week. He never, he's a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
Dude doesn't have to fold his own laundry.
But he does.
But it's a ritual he's had since he did rep theater, I guess, when he was 20.
He continues it.
So even to this day, like on Saturday mornings or Sunday morning, whatever day he says, he folds his laundry and sits and he thinks. And it's his thinking time that he uses and just processes through things.
No, I get that.
And that they made fun of him on TNG because he would go home and fold his laundry. And they're like, what? You have the money to do that, right? You can send out for somebody. You can send that out. I think it was Jonathan Frakes that was like ripping him for it. Still does to this day, like anytime they go to a convention. But his poor mentality doesn't let him get egotistical and brag. He's had a very successful, wonderful, blessed life, but you never feel like this is just some rich old dude bragging about what he's accomplished because it's all coming from a place of humility and by the time you get to TNG, you understand the crap that he's gone through and what he did to get there and the work that he put in to be able to even have the chance to do TNG and to be in movies and things like that. And it's speaking of being in movies and getting your start kind of thing. he was in Dune, right? So Dune was 1976, 75.
Yeah,
Somewhere in the mid to late 70s.
It was 19 AD.
Is it the
I don't
80s?
know. I mean, 80 if it
You're
was.
probably
I'll,
right.
I'll look it up.
It's
I'll
early.
look it up.
Thank you. So to get his start in Dune, I forget who the director of Dune was. Look that up too.
84. Wow.
Oh, really? It seems
Wow,
older than that.
84.
Who directed Dune?
That was Finch. David Finch.
David Finch. So David Finch comes to England and sees, I think, not King Lear, but not Macbeth, but some king, Richard III, one of those, kingly characters in Shakespeare. There's plenty of them. And Patrick Stewart was this, really gaunt. He'd lost a lot of weight. He had a long wig on because he lost his hair when he was like 25, maybe. And so he was completely bald from his early 20s on. But the thing is that actually probably in his teens, because that was a part of his shtick, how he would get parts, because he would walk into his audition with a toupee on or a wig on. And he had a special audition toupee that he would go to all of his auditions with, and then he would, do his lines and da-da-da. And he said, and so here I am, I'm a professional working actor. And then he would rip off his toupee and say, and I'm a character actor, and you can put any wig on me you want. And so you're getting 2 actors for the price of 1.
That's great.
And he had this whole little sales pitch that he would do for himself. And then any producer worth their salt trying to pinch pennies anywhere they could, they would 2 actors for the price of 1. Sold.
Done.
And that's how he got a lot of his parts.
That's good. That's smart.
And honestly, even for his big roles, he went off to some big role and he just had no time to prep for it or something like that. And he had to get his wife to send him his toupee so that he could go in and do his shtick, so that he could do his two actors for the price of 1 thing. So someone mailed it to him so that he could be ready for the audition. So anyway, did you find the thing about Dune?
So I found it. This is where you get they signed the rights in 1971 with the intention to do it.
That's right.
But it never got made because
done.
the film producer who bought it died 2 years later, and then plans just kept jumping. The rights kept flip-flopping everywhere in the 70s,
Right.
they finally got something down in the early 80s, 81, to start shooting on.
Actually filming it.
84, which was a bomb.
Yeah.
It bombed in theaters.
Total bomb, yeah.
And it went through. It was supposed to be in the 70s, but the film producer died 2 years after signing the rights.
Okay, well that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
that's where
the director was in the Royal Shakespeare Company and was looking for a different actor who was the lead of this play that they were in. Not Patrick Stewart. He wasn't there yet. He was just in the show or one of the kings or something like that. That wasn't a huge or the main role. I don't think. And then he just saw Patrick Stewart walk by, or he saw the king walk by. And he's like, wow. And he's told his production assistant, hey, go find out who that actor was because he looked great. We might want to put him in Dune because he had already, they were gonna film it. They weren't filming yet. But he's like, man, go find out who he was and make a note because we might need to use him for the movie. And he, sure enough, another actor that they had dropped out or got sick or something like that. And then the director was like, who are we going to get for this? Because we got to film next week. And then he turns to his PA and like, oh, who was that actor that walked past us in the Royal Shakespeare Company when we were there? And she looks at Patrick Stewart. Say, okay, get Patrick Stewart. Call him and fly him to LA.
Just like that.
Just like that. Just literally all he did was walk by the dressing room of some other actor, and that director remembered him from that.
Wow.
And so the PA finds him, calls him, flies him first class, working class Yorkshire Patrick Stewart, who grew up in his outhouse, He's suddenly in first class seating being catered to with all the bells and whistles all the way to Los Angeles for a film acting gig. Walks into the door, door's open, and so he knocks on the door, tut tut, and he says, yeah, and comes in, and then he says, oh, hi, Mr. Lynch, I'm, how are you? And he said, yes, can I help you? He didn't recognize him at all.
Oh, wow.
And so Patrick Stewart's heart just drops because he's like, oh my God, you don't even know who I am. And it's like, well, I'm Patrick Stewart. I'm the guy that you asked for to. I was under the impression that you wanted me in this movie. Didn't say a word. Just stared at him.
Oh no!
Because he was thinking, you could see that behind David Lynch's eyes. He's churning. He's like, oh my God, who is this guy? And what am I going to do? Because I have to film next week. And then right at that moment, some other people working on the movie come in and interrupt the awkward silence and stuff, and they're all warm and welcome. Oh, thank you, Patrick, for coming. Good to meet you, and all this other kind of stuff. David Lynch was like, never talked to him for the whole film, like never, nothing, because he didn't look anything like the Gaunt King or whatever. He had just come off of his Australian tour with Vivian Lee.
He had done something
so he
different
was like
now.
deep tan and everything else. And so he's like a whole different person. And David Lynch was just like, oh my God, what have I done now? And so he never talked to him, never warmed up to him, no nothing, never. It was like a Gene Roddenberry thing, because like Gene Roddenberry never liked Patrick Stewart either. Never warmed up to him. He never really understood why. He never got on board. They had like really tense dinner conversations, because eventually, once the show was definitely going to be a success and they realized it's going to happen, Gene Roddenberry was like, well, I guess I better make friends with this Patrick Stewart that I'm stuck with for TNG. And they would go to dinner, and it was always like really tense and short and awkward, and they never got along. And Patrick Stewart never understood why, and he couldn't get it. But that's just the way it was. And
so he must have had someone else in mind.
He definitely did not want Patrick Stewart, and had to come back several times.
I remember there being a little bit of controversy because a balding, older.
Exactly.
The image just didn't it was a vast contrast to Kirk.
Roddenberry apparently got overruled on his own show about who the captain was going to be.
Wow.
Because he never warmed up to him and would barely speak to him.
That's too bad, because he didn't. Roddenberry never saw past the first season, right?
Oh, he got through, I think, 4 or 5 seasons, actually.
Oh, did he?
He was around for a while, yeah.
He never warmed up to him?
No, that's what he said.
Wow,
He never got close to him.
Because I can understand the first season, you being a little, I don't think this is going to work.
No, I think he made it through 3 or 4 seasons before he died.
Okay, never mind then.
But,
never mind.
And so by season 2, it was already one of the most popular shows, and then season 3 is when you had your Borg cliffhanger episode, and that was when it was the most popular show on television, was by season 3. That was like all summer long. You're talking about, are they going to kill Patrick Stewart, or is he going to come back, or are they going to have to blow up the cube and save the Enterprise and all this other stuff? So it was just all kinds of great stories like that are so good. But the thing that I think I enjoyed most is that throughout all of those stories and his childhood, and even when he's very young, there's a story he tells about a squirrel, and how he always paused to appreciate nature and to, smell the roses, quite literally, I think. And so there was squirrels are pretty rare in his neighborhood growing up. And so to see a squirrel was like, wow, look at that. And so they were all gathered around. And then this other rough and tumble kid from, older boy from Yorkshire, he had a gun. And so he shows up and said, what are you chaps looking at? In the Yorkshire accent that he did. And then, so the older kid shoots the squirrel, and then as he's like raising the gun to shoot the squirrel, Patrick Stewart, like slow motion, like, no, and he wanted to stop him, but he shoots the squirrel, and he talks about in detail how the squirrel fell from the tree, and it was all hurting and died, and he went home and cried and sobbed, because he was just a kid, and he'd never seen anything die before, and it left a permanent mark in his head. So you kind of, things like that, you see how sensitive he is and emotional he is, and how much things matter to him, and the details of stuff like that. And I resonate with that a lot, because I have a lot of memories that are similar that don't mean anything to anybody else, but to him, that image of that boy coming up and shooting the squirrel out of the tree, it never left him. And and then eventually in COVID 2020, because it gets all the way through his life, till today. It's a memoir after all. Then during COVID, he's living in L.A. during lockdown, and they had a squirrel come to the backyard. And eventually, like through slowly feeding the squirrel and the trust games, because it's COVID and lockdown, so what else have you got to do but to try to get a squirrel to eat out of your hand slowly? And eventually, they trained the squirrel so that it would come into the house and take nuts from their lap. And so he, full circle, 70 years later, got to make amends for that squirrel that he couldn't save, basically, as a child. That memory never left him. And now he has his own squirrel that comes to his house and he gets to feed nuts during COVID and everything else.
Wow.
To any other person, you tell that story out of context, and let me tell you about this squirrel, and it could have been such a boring, stupid story. It could have been such a, okay, dude, thanks for telling me about your stupid squirrel that you witnessed getting killed, and then it's a story about feeding squirrels out of your backyard. But you think about anybody else telling that story that I know, I'd be like, great, thanks for telling me about your squirrel, dude. But with him, and this whole book is like this, you care, and it's a good story, and at the end of it, you're like, oh, that was a good chapter. I like that.
Oh,
that's a sweet
that made me
story.
happy. Yeah,
exactly.
No, that's a great story.
So like the whole book is like that. You at the end of it, you're
just
like,
little
wow,
vignette stories.
I didn't know that was going to go there, but I'm happy it did. And that's the vibe of the whole thing. He talks about living in a haunted house and how he sold the haunted house that was totally haunted to somebody in California because at the time the law said that you had to reveal anything wrong with the house, including spiritual hauntings or anything. Like if you suspected the house was haunting, if you suspected at that time that the house was haunted, you had to legally put that into the sale of the house, that the house was haunted. He didn't do it. So he didn't tell them that he thought the house was haunted with all these things that happened. And he's got all these great stories about stuff that, like really weird stuff that happened, like poltergeist level stuff, Ghostbusters level stuff that happened. And so he didn't tell the owners, but then he like ran into them like a year later, or he got I was on the phone with the woman who bought the house,
right?
And she just all she said was, "Hey, you didn't tell us about everything that goes on in the house, did you?" And he was like, "Oh no," because he didn't know if it was his. He's not like overly I believe in ghosts or anything. It was just like, I can't explain this, and it's really weird, and it could be it's like ghostish related that you hear about, but I'm not going to tell somebody because it makes you feel crazy. But he knows what he saw, kind of thing. But then she just said, "You didn't tell us everything," and he apologized, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, is anybody hurt? Did anything happen?" And then he came clean on the phone and talked to her about it, and apparently they had some of the same stuff happen in their house. Like totally, he didn't know her.
Wow.
He never went back to that house.
Wow.
But like, it's so cool that stuff, like little stuff like that. Who would have thought that Patrick Stewart or Captain Picard would be telling you ghost stories in this book, and that it would actually be interesting like that? So anyway. Things like that are
that's pretty neat. That's a pretty neat story.
It really is. Lots of fun stuff. And then let's see. The last notes I have are acting wise. I thought this was great as an actor. That his famous actor. A lot of people are going to come up to you at conventions or on the street and everything else and say, "What's the one thing you can tell me about how to make it as a Hollywood actor or whatever?" And over the years, he says he's boiled it down to be fearless. And if you can do that and embody that, then you can have a chance to make it in Hollywood. But you have to be fearless. And not just Hollywood, but in theater in general. So just go for it. If you want to do it, then freaking go for it. Get out there and do it. Be fearless about it. So I wanted to share that. That's one of my new mantras that I have, like in my notes and my own notebooks and stuff, is be fearless.
Yeah.
Dash Pat Stew. 2023. You know. Acting wise, the last thing I'll say about that is it was so. I said last week that it was like I was vicariously living a lot of that stuff through him, because I'm never going to be in the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I wouldn't want to be, but I would want to be, but I'm never going to do it. But if I had, it's just that you got to. He has the same sort of technique that I do ascribe to as an actor, which is make it as real as possible. If you were this person in this situation, in this moment, what would you really do? And it really comes down to listening and responding. So someone says a line to you, how would you genuinely react to that line in the very first time you heard it in real life? And then that's where all of your inspiration can come from as an actor and as a character. It's like you just have to let it be real every time you hear it, and let it be the first time that you as a person has ever heard that line. And then just react to it like you normally would. And that's making it real and keeping it listening and responding. And to hear him testify to that method, which is exactly what I do and try to do and practice, and to hear him spit it back, like I've been doing this for 70 years and I'm very successful doing it, and to hear him validate, I guess is the word I'm looking for, that technique and method that I've always gone for. It just felt so good, like a mentor almost telling me that I've been doing it right, kind of thing. So I'm very excited about that. And I actually sent an email to Judith Weston, who is a brilliant acting coach and teacher, and she has a great book called the Film Acting Directing Actors is the name of it, which is basically you're taking these left-brained directors and people to helping them communicate with these right-brained actors so that they can make a movie together.
Right.
And so she's taught workshops for like 30 years with these AAA super directors who just need to know how do I talk to Brad Pitt when he refuses me? Like he wants to be Brad Pitt, but I need him to do this.
Exactly.
And they don't know how to talk to like the actors and like George Lucas is famous for faster and more intense, right? That's all he would say to them.
That's all he would say. It was terrible.
And that's very common, is that a lot of directors, they don't know how to direct. Lucas, very brilliant creatively and film-wise and technically making the movie. But when he told Carrie Fisher or Harrison Ford, I need you to do it different. It wasn't good enough. Well, how would you like it, George? Faster and more intense. That's all he ever said.
He didn't say anything else.
That's a very, very common expression. So Judith Weston wrote this whole book about it, which I just fell in love with. It's like my acting Bible. And I've read it through, listened to it. She did an audiobook on it too. And I actually emailed her out of the blue from her website right after I finished Making It So. And I was like, hi, I'm a big fan of the book. I hope you make an audiobook of the second book you did. I wanted to recommend Making It So to you about Patrick Stewart's memoir. And I basically pitched her the book, and then I said a good thank you. And I said, the book also helped me to finally take the time to sit down and say thank you for writing your book, because it's changed how much my acting has changed and how much I've grown. I told her how I got to direct my first play and got to do my first project and how much it helped me and all this other kind of stuff. She wrote me back within hours. And just as soon as she woke up that morning in England, I guess, or whatever, and says, thank you so much for your delightful message. I was so happy to read it. And I'm actually I'm putting all the stuff together to record the second audiobook now. So your message was like a nice little motivating factor for me to do all this work to get the audiobook ready. And just sent me this lovely note back from one of my mentors currently that I love.
So unlike the witch from Choose Your Own Adventure, who we complimented.
Yes.
We complimented so much,
yes.
but she said no thanks.
So Judith Weston actually wrote me back. And then she told me the joy that the second book that I wanted her to record an audiobook is going to be out in April, which is my birthday. So I get to get that for my birthday. So it'll be great.
Right on.
So, but that's part of the Be Fearless, Pat Stu thing. He's like, I'm going to send this lady an email. And it's just like, just do it. It's fine. So that's the last acting thing that I'll say, and I'll be done with that. And but it was just so connecting for me personally to have all it be so similar. So the last things that I think a lot of people will probably want to read the book about is like the finale of The Next Generation and the show that we hated and loved at the same time, which was Star Trek Picard. Oh boy. He does talk a lot about what those first two seasons were and why the third season is different and why we hated the first two seasons and the third one was such a difference. Get this.
Listening.
He agreed to do it only after lots of stipulations. And
the third season?
No, the show itself. Because he was so done with Picard, he had done all these other great characters after TNG was over. And honestly, by the end of season 7, he knew, he's like, dude, I'm so done with this character and this show.
He had been doing it for 7 years.
7
now.
years. They did 7 full seasons, and it hit hard in the 7th season. He's like, all right, I'm never looking back to this character. And he said farewell to Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Fair. And then went on to do X-Men and all these other great things and lots of stage work and great characters that he finally got to do. Like he finally got to go back and play Macbeth or King Lear.
All the things he wanted to do. Les Mis.
Exactly. The huge
all
stuff.
These,
and things, dream list of stuff.
And the thing is, though, that gave him the ability to go and do those type of things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then, just draw from that experience at the same time. And so good for him. And I was really happy about it. But he was never going to come back to Picard because why? And so they finally convinced him because of the story arc they wanted to tell. But he was the one who was insistent. No uniforms whatsoever. I don't want to wear another dang uniform. And then he said, I don't want it to be about the TNG cast. It needs to be about Picard and his story. And I don't want this to happen. I don't want that to happen. And I want this to happen. And there was something else, I forget what it is right now off the top of my head, but the writers kept asking him in season 1 and season 2, can we please do this with the character? Can we write it this way? And he would veto it and say, no, that's
we're not doing it that
That's
way.
not what we agreed to, and that's not how we're going to do it. He had to tell them no repeatedly. Finally, the season 3 comes along, which we know now is a massively big pivot of the rest of the show and is some of the best Star Trek I've ever seen because it leans into what we loved and knew about it. It was like the Picard that we knew and loved.
Totally breath of fresh air.
It was.
I would never suggest anyone watch the first 2 seasons.
No,
they're just garbage.
The first 2 seasons I will forget about, but the third season, oh man, it was such a beautiful ending to the whole thing, and in large part that was because he finally took the reins off of the writers and let them write what they needed to write and to say what they needed to say. Exactly, and it's not like he was being obstinate or stubborn or having animosity about it. He wanted to not have a reunion show. He had seen stuff like that. He wanted to not fall into the trap of other bad shows and other crap that he had seen in the past.
Yeah, and I get that, but the thing is, though, that's what the show needed to be.
It did.
Because it looks like where they were going with Picard, they didn't know, and the story was just so far out. They didn't feel. Remember, we said, "Wow, we're watching some show with some guy pretending to be Picard in some alternate universe,
some pale imitation of
and how no one is like they used to be. I mean, what's his name?
Don Delancey.
Q was not Q. All this kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
yeah, it fell flat, but thankfully it got where it needed to go. It got where it needed to go. That's another episode of Saturday Morning Samoflange, which you can go back and listen to. Scroll back through the episodes and you can find plenty on that too. Mm-hmm. But then one thing that I really loved, and one of my favorite stories, is the ending of how Picard was supposed to end. And one of the stipulations that I mentioned earlier is, and that he said from the beginning.
Go ahead.
No, he had said, I want Picard's story to wrap up and as him happy and satisfied, like with his life. I don't want to die in a blaze of glory. I don't want to have this moment.
It's the Bilbo Baggins Hobbit, and he lived the rest of his days happily ever after.
And he lived the rest of his days there and back again. Exactly. That was one of his requirements to come back and do the show. He's like, fine, we'll wrap it up with his story, and it's going to end well, and then here's how I want it to end. So they're filming the last scene, and I believe the show ended on the poker table, just like TNG did back in the 90s, right?
Right.
So they're dealing cards, they're having a good time. I should have done this a long time ago. And then they have another beautiful reunion moment around the poker table with the original crew, and they have it's a great send-off and everything else. So they were filming that scene, but then Patrick had to be on a plane that night or that early next morning. He had to be somewhere for this huge commitment that he had already made, and the producers of Picard were fully aware, but they're like, it was on the schedule to shoot it, but they couldn't, they kept getting delayed and they couldn't do it. So he's like, look, I got to get to the airport. So I'll tell you what, this final scene of the entire show, the rap scene, let me get on the airport. This is one shot. All we'll have to do is it'll take a few hours, but I promise you, I'm going to fly to New York, do my thing, and then you just let me know and I'll come back afterward, and I will specifically come back just to do this last scene for you. You just tell me the day.
Oh, wow.
So he flies, they finish what they were shooting, and they saved that last shot for another day. He flies to New York, nothing. He never hears from Paramount. No one calls him. And he says he feels partly a little bit guilty that he didn't call them. He waited too long to reach out and say, hey, when are we going to film that last scene? And he eventually did have to call because they didn't call him. And when he finally did, they were like, nah, you know what? We're not going to do that. The studio thinks it'd cost too much money, it'd be too much work. No one wants to do it. We think the show's fine. And he was like, what? No, you're telling me the scene that I asked for from the beginning
is not going to happen
is now cut because you didn't get the schedule right. And we couldn't film it that day. And I promised you I could come back.
Yeah, I would come back and do it because I want this.
I would come back for an hour or two, and then the scene would be done. And you're suddenly telling me, yeah, studio doesn't want to do it. It costs too much money. And what? So he was, livid, naturally, like I would have been. But apparently, so he goes into great detail explaining what the last scene of Picard is supposed to be in his own words.
Oh, wow. So this never got recorded.
Never got shot, but he tells you this is what it's supposed to be. So he's at Chateau Picard. He's looking out into the vineyard. The sun's going down. Yes, he's got his beloved dog next to him because, he fosters a lot of dogs and takes care of like pit bulls and lots of dogs. It's something he and his wife do. Mm-hmm. And so the beloved dog is next to him. He's got a glass of Chateau Picard in his hand. And he hears a voice calling to him from behind. Because remember, he had a couple of love interests in Picard, too. He had the Romulan girl who was living with him for a while. Yeah. And then he had Beverly Crusher, shows back up, and he's got a son now and all this other stuff. Yeah. So you hear a voice call from behind, off camera, behind you, and he turns and looks, and you never see who the woman is, so you don't know if it's Beverly, you don't know if it's Ro or whatever the Romulan girl's name was. Yeah. And you don't know who it is. But his real-life wife, whose name is Sunny, she was set to actually record the line, Jean-Luc, come in for dinner, or something like that. Yeah. It was just one line, but his real-life wife was going to say it so that, and they were going to maybe change her voice so that you couldn't quite tell who it was exactly. And then he was just going to smile and turn towards the camera and walk past the camera and back into his house. The sun would go down over the Chateau vineyard, and, credits roll. And that's the ending. That's how he wants Picard to end. So literally walking off into the sunset with his happy, satisfied, mission accomplished. Got my dog, wrapped up. Got my wine, got my wife, got my life. Everything's good. Boom.
Wow. So awesome. I love that.
Oh, it's maybe a bit cliche, but in the very, very best way. It's all I would want.
Put it to rest.
That's the only thing I would want for Captain Picard. Yeah. Like, dude's done enough.
Time to relax.
To go out on another blaze of glory. Exactly. And he's done enough. He doesn't have to make it to next Saturday.
Morning.
Samoflange.